Hello and welcome back to Vape Live. I am delighted to be joined by Director of Advocacy Group We Vape, Mark Oates, to talk all things vaping advocacy in the UK and beyond. So Mark, I guess a great place for us to start would be if you could just introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about the work that you do for We Vape.
Sure. So I started We Vape around a year ago after a sort of a long period of being very interested in harm reduction. So my first dalliances in harm reduction were to do with snus and nicotine pouches. I'm a vapor and a snus user and a nicotine pouch user myself. And I used to live in China and was smoking 50 pence a pack cigarettes. And on my way back to the UK, I stopped over in Sweden and brought myself some snus. And I thought it was awesome. I also thought it was a great way of stopping smoking. But then the big problem I found was when I couldn't get hold of snus because it was illegal to sell in the UK, I was reverting back to cigarettes. So vaping then offered me the opportunity to move away from cigarettes entirely. So I vape and snus. And I started a bit of a campaign. I used to work in Parliament and I started a campaign to legalise snus. And then that's what drove me into starting to talk about harm reduction. And I saw how a lot of people and governments were not recognising the role that vaping could play in reducing smoking deaths across the world.
So obviously this is a vaping focused event, but there's more to, as you say, there's more to tobacco harm reduction than vaping. For people who might not be familiar with snus, what is it and why is it so seemingly controversial?
Yeah, so snus is effectively a sort of tea bag of pasteurized tobacco, and that differentiates it from chewing tobacco because chewing tobacco is fermented rather than pasteurized. So that manages to kill off a lot of the carcinogens. So it's got a vastly lower level of carcinogens than chewing tobacco does. And it just comes in a tea bag, and I'll just show you it. It's like that. And you just pop it up your top lip, and it sends nicotine into your body through the mucous membrane. And obviously that therefore gets rid of the fact that the nicotine is going into the body through the combustion and lungs that happens with smoking. So it's vastly safer than smoking. And it's the reason why Sweden has the lowest cancer rate at smoking related cancers in Europe. And what's really stark about the data is because they have a higher number of men using snus compared to women, the women tend to smoke more. You can see the data play out. So sometimes when I've told this to people, they said, oh, that's just because of their diet and sweet. Well, that doesn't make sense because the women also have normal levels of smoking-related illnesses because they smoke, but the men don't. Why is it controversial? Well, I think it's because of governments fearing it becoming a new and trendy thing that would encourage young people to start using it. Kind of what we're seeing with vaping, people scare tactics saying, youth vaping or and in the 1990s, there was a big scare with a brand called Skull Bandits. And they were using, frankly, pretty predatory methods to try and get their brand out there. And they were using youth ambassadors in universities. And Edwina Currie went to town on it. And she got a ban whacked on it and encouraged the European Union to put a ban on it. And since then, we've been in gridlock. But of course, Sweden made the European Union allow them to continue selling, allowing them to sell snus for them joining the EU. So that's how they've managed to get that opt-out. And we've seen that start a difference. And quite a few of us have been campaigning to legalise it in the EU. So far, the EU has been unwilling to change their mind, despite the huge amounts of evidence that show that it's vastly safer than smoking.
So on that note, what would you say are the main benefits for vaping over smoking?
Well, ultimately, you're moving away from the combustion. I should add that I'm a believer in individual liberty. So I don't think that we should attack smokers. I think that's unfair and wrong. And people, if they choose to, as long as they have the knowledge, that they should, of course, be allowed to. And I wouldn't ever want to walk towards a prohibitionary type world. I think that would be a terrible step and actually could cause more harm. We'd end up smoking being something like the drugs market with the criminal underworld making vast profit out of it. But you're avoiding that combustion, which means that you're not getting anywhere near the same level of harm from it. But people are still enjoying nicotine, which we know nicotine is not the thing that causes damage to humans When they smoke, it's the tar and the combustion. So you've got the great health benefits. Another area which I think is really important is health and poverty inequality. So in the UK, smoking is so expensive. People can be spending £3,000 a year on smoking. I recently did a poll for We Vape, and I think about 60-70% of people said they were saving £2,000 a year since they switched to vaping. So some of the poorest areas in the UK have a higher smoking rate than the general population. And so they are being directly affected, and the money is being taken out of their pocket by smoking, and vaping can put that money back into their pocket, and it can also vastly improve their health as well.
So those people may not be familiar if they're new to vaping, that vaping products in the UK are regulated under the Tobacco and Related Products Regulations, the TRPR, and that is currently under review in the UK. And I know you've contributed to a consultation on that. Could you tell me just a little bit about what the review is and what you hope might be the outcome of the review?
Sure. So when we were in the European Union, all our laws were really governed by Brussels. And as part of the process of the UK leaving, the government enacted the Withdrawal Act, and that passed over all the laws that we had on the EU statute books directly into UK law. And that meant that our sort of on the day we left, we had exactly the same laws as we had previously. But from that point, the government can change things. So they could remove laws or they could introduce more laws. So they've got the review, the TRPR review, and the start of that was a consultation which took place between February and March of this year. And it was really sort of call for evidence. And I worked really hard to encourage vapers to engage in that process. I think that we're very lucky in the UK. The UK is probably the most progressive country in the world in regards to harm reduction of vaping. But because of that, sometimes vapers don't maybe recognise that they still should be engaging in the political process. And whilst I think a good level of regulation can help protect vaping, it can avoid bad products and some of the problems we've seen in America, there is a way to go to improve the regulation in order to try and help more smokers move away from smoking. So, I think nicotine limits, whilst I think we should have some nicotine limit, there is evidence to suggest that the nicotine limit can prevent heavy smokers moving away from smoking and onto vaping. We also need to try and encourage greater knowledge of vaping. I've seen some data which suggests that 60% of smokers think that vaping is as dangerous as smoking is. And that's having a massive effect in preventing people moving away onto safer products. So the government needs to think a bit more innovatively. They've got a target, smoke-free 2030. And at the moment, we're not going to hit that. They need to be a bit more forward thinking. Can they allow vape shops and companies not to advertise aggressively, but perhaps to put the independent studies that have been conducted by the likes of Public Health England, could they inform the public of those facts?
So do you think there is a prospect of the regulations being relaxed? I know there's people who are concerned that given international events, they might be frightened.
Well, I think that, COVID is clearly on the mind of the Department of Health, and I've been involved in encouraging good policy for the last 6 years on a various number of topics, and I've never seen a department respond so slowly to some of the correspondence that I've sent them. Now, I completely appreciate that. They've got to fight what is a really difficult battle, but could that lead to them putting less consideration onto major changes for the TRPR? Yeah, I think it could. I don't think we should stop trying to encourage them to see the light, though, because COVID's awful, and we should challenge that fight now. But it's killed 120,000 people, which is absolutely awful. But smoking is killing 80,000 people a year in the UK. So I think maybe we can make them realise they should continue putting the same amount of effort, not the same amount of effort, but a lot of effort that they're putting into COVID. They should also replant that to try and tackle the other biggest killer in the UK. Just quickly on changes, I mean, I know a lot of We Vape members are very keen on a very simple one, which is the tank size on a vape, which I completely agree. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And I find it really frustrating sitting at my desk working and feels like every 5 minutes having to refill this tiny tank. And I don't understand where that policy comes from. And I would hope that the UK government could think more pragmatically about things like that.
So another big policy review that's going to be happening this year is the World Health Organization's COP9 event. And obviously this is very controversial in vaping circles. The World Health Organization has taken a very critical stance on vaping and harm reduction. So I understand you submitted evidence to the APPG on this. So could you tell me a little bit about that actual process and what makes the World Health Organization so skeptical about vaping?
Wow, it's a big subject. I think I could talk for a long time just on that. But yeah, so I was very kindly asked by the APPG to give some oral evidence, and I also submitted some written evidence. And I did that sort of spending time talking to vapers, but it wasn't particularly controversial what I suggested. And a lot comes down to the fact that the original Conference of the Parties, FCTC, Framework Tobacco Control, that highlighted that harm reduction played a part in the whole plan. And since then, that harm reduction idea, which was in the statute books, that has dropped and fallen away. And it seems to be a much more focus on tobacco control. I also submitted some evidence. It's quite clear that different parts of the World Health Organization are starting to put more and more anti-vaping rhetoric out there. There's a number of reports that have come out. You only need to look at Twitter and you see tweets heaping praise on countries like India, which have banned vaping. It's awful to see, because some of these countries have so much to gain from vaping. Millions and millions of smokers around the world. In developing countries, vaping could play such a good role in reducing these deaths and health problems that occur. So Britain needs to take the challenge to the World Health Organization. Britain is a world leader in the environmental causes, and I think we should have as much focus on smoking and smoking-related deaths as we do on the environment. If you look at the numbers, smoking is a huge killer, and are currently killing vastly more than the environment is, and even will, according to the data. And so the government is a huge funder of World Health Organization. It needs to step up to the plate and take this subject seriously. And I'm really pleased that the all-party parliamentary group did this study and this inquiry, because we need to get it up the agenda.
So why is it you think that the UK seems to be such an outlier in embracing vaping so much, such a more committed way than other countries?
I'm not certain, but it was, I think, partly the fact that Britain has quite an entrepreneurial spirit, and vaping didn't come about from government diktat. It wasn't bureaucrats that told people to vape, and it wasn't public health bodies. It wasn't the NHS. It was lots of individuals who found this with the kind of innovative entrepreneurial spirit that a lot of British people have, and the kind of garageista style, in the same way people like making motorbikes in the UK. I think, people were making their own vape systems, passing them around amongst friends, and then the market grew, and it became so big so quickly, almost under the radar, that it became very difficult politically for the government to sort of crack down on it. And luckily then the data started to appear that pointed towards it being safer than smoking. And I think we are lucky, because in our country, our National Health Service, being entirely funded by the government, it spends a huge amount of money, about 130 billion a year. So you have a department, one of the biggest departments in government, that itself has a lot to gain from reducing the money it spends on smoke-related illnesses. So that played a huge part. And the Treasury, which obviously gains a lot of money in tax receipts, they had to bow down to the NHS saying, no, we want to save the money. Whereas other governments where, you've got the health service is entirely private, well, the government only will lose money. It won't gain any money from it. Our government doesn't invest in tobacco companies, which is great. It obviously receives tax money, but in China, you've got some of the tobacco companies being majority owned by the state. And so there's a big incentive not to support things like vaping. I have to give a level of respect to our public health bodies that maybe at one time weren't supportive of vaping, but saw the light. And that takes a bit of pragmatism to change your position. So that's great. And the NNA, New Nicotine Alliance, also played a fantastic role in making sure the government were aware about the facts regarding vaping. So yeah, a huge number of things have caused our position to be so positive.
So obviously, as you said earlier, we're no longer part of the European Union, but the EU has its own regulatory issues coming up. We had the Shear report, which came out last year. I mean, I know obviously you're speaking more from a British perspective, but how do you see the situation for European vapers and the state of vaping in Europe?
Yeah, it's deeply worrying. I think no matter what your position on Britain leaving the EU before, I think there is evidence appearing that, particularly on this issue of vaping, that I'm glad we left. We should have the freedom to write our own rules, and the only downside is that because we've left, we're no longer influencing the European Union. So it is sad to see our nearest group of countries now take steps which seem so awful for both health and freedom. Things such as flavour bans being suggested in Holland, the same in Denmark, talk of taxation on vaping products. The EU Beating Cancer Plan talks about banning vaping in public places. Again, looking at bans of flavours. It's awful to see, and I think we do need to support our European friends and allies. And the only way we're going to prevent that is if the consumers rise up and make some noise. And I think there were 10 or 20,000 vapers in Holland that contacted their government, and that's fantastic to see. But it is probably only consumer power, and sure, industry's got to play a part. And I sometimes think that industry doesn't realize how important it is to be involved in the political process, but it should. And sometimes when it comes to engaging in politics, it can be hard to measure. You can measure your marketing budget. You can see, right, I've spent this amount of money on marketing and I've increased my sales by this amount. You can't see that when you maybe spend some time and resources engaging in politics and parliament. But if you don't, the end result could be that your business is wiped out by rules and regulations that prevent it happening.
So, I mean, you kind of answered my next question a little bit there. I mean, what do you think vapers in the UK should be doing, I guess, engaging politically as much as possible?
Yeah, so this now we've done the TRPR, and I was really pleased with the number of people that were moving on, clicking the links that I was sort of sharing. I think over 10,000 people, well over 10,000 into the 15,000 area were going on to the consultation. I think I saw somewhere that it was one of the biggest looked at consultations since the Department for Health website was first created. So I'm really pleased with that engagement. And then later this year, I think COP9 is going to be really important. I'm really keen to encourage vapers to contact their member of parliament. If you go on the We Vape website, you can click on a little link and it will help you contact your member of parliament and just tell them your story. No need to go into too much detail about regulations. Just remind them that behind the numbers, the vapers are real people, that we've got family and we've got friends, and that we're pleased when our brother or sister or mother or father quit smoking through vaping. That there's that many of us that we could cause a little bit of political headache. Politicians are like the rest of us, they like keeping their jobs. So if you remind them that I think in most constituencies, there's probably around 5,000 vapers spread out around the UK. If you remind them that you're there, and that they could lose their job if they don't think of you, then it can be very successful. So there's that. And I also want to maybe do a postcard campaign. I'm going to look at getting a postcard campaign, get some postcards into vape shops, and people can write a little message, tell them, politicians what flavour they're using, how many cigarettes they used to smoke a day, and how important vaping is to them, and get them off there. So that's one way I'd like to do it. Yeah,
that's great. So I guess overall, a good place to wrap up would be: are you optimistic about the future of vaping in the UK, broadly speaking?
Yeah, I think so. But I think that if we go on the continued route, the status quo, then we're not going to achieve what we could achieve. If we were to push the government a little harder, show them that in order to make smoke-free 2030 a reality, we need to change the path we're on and have a more positive harm reduction approach, then we can achieve even more. But yeah, compared to the rest of the world, yes, I am positive. Having said that, Britain, despite leaving the EU, is not in any way absolved of being involved in the political world. And the World Health Organization carries a huge risk for us, because if they go down the path of trying to introduce overarching rules to ban vaping or vape flavors, then that in some way is going to affect Britain. Now, will that mean that we ban it here? Well, I would hope not. But we've been lucky. We've had a Conservative government that have been pretty supportive, and a Liberal Democrat coalition that have been supportive, but things can change. So we shouldn't be complacent, and let's keep our finger on the pulse. Let's keep on reminding the politicians we exist. Let's keep on reminding them how important vaping is to us.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, Mark. It's been really interesting to talk to you.